Hi, everybody. Welcome again to the TWILA Aftershow. Joining me, of course, on my left, Karl Wiggers, co-producer of This Week in Louisiana Agriculture, Kristen Oakes, and Avery Davidson, co-host of the show. And with us in the studio is Greg Fox. He is a grain marketing specialist with the Louisiana Farm Bureau Marketing Association. And that brings us to our not the first story in the show, but we're going to talk about Karl's
But we need to talk about something more important right now, okay? Greg Fox, really cool name, but his son's name even better.
Stone
Fox.
Yeah.
That's the bomb, yo.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line.
That was
The bomb, yo.
Karl, you went out in the cornfields this week, something near and dear to your heart, of course, and your family farm. Corn is one of the things you guys grow. But where were you this weekend? What did you cover?
So this weekend, or this week, actually, yesterday, I went up to Crowville, a place that actually I used to work at the elevator there in Crowville. But, I got to visit with a bunch of farmers. Corn, I love corn because that's what I know pretty well. But I was talking with, some of the guys at the elevator about, how important the elevator is to the corn crop, to the corn farmer, as far as that's where they take a lot of their corn. If they don't have on farm storage, some grain bins, they take it to the elevator. And then the elevator buys it, and it moves on down the chain. But I was talking with them because I know I've worked in that elevator, and I know how important that part of the chain is for these farmers to keep moving their combines in the field. And it was an interesting story to go shoot because having worked there before. But the whole purpose of shooting the story I did was just to highlight a different part of the industry that farmers depend on so heavily. And I got to talk with some farmers about, prices. We talked about yields. We talked about, weather conditions. And generally, weather has been pretty good for farmers in northeast Louisiana. I know that's the story, part of your story, Neil, is
right.
Weather and how it's not been so great. But weather, for the most part, has been pretty good for farmers in northeast Louisiana harvesting corn. And even a couple of them say, if I got a shower, it kind of helped finish off my beans. But I know that's we're getting to the end of them wanting rain on their beans as well. But weather has not been that big of an issue, but the price that they're seeing now is really scary for anybody that doesn't have any corn booked. Greg, that's why I wanted you in here. Greg, you deal with grain crops. That's what you deal with every day. Tell me about what grain crops you actually deal with the marketing side of things.
We market corn, soybeans, wheat, and grain sorghum. And grain sorghum's futures-wise, price-wise, is off of the corn market, so it doesn't stand alone.
Got you. So the corn market drives multiple things. And as we're talking market, and that's something that even growing up on a farm, I don't really understand that well. And in fact, on the show, I referenced Neil as the expert because he's covered it for so long as
he punted to you
as a reporter. And Neil said, "I'm not the expert. Greg's the expert." So, Greg, I know one of the things I talked about in the tag of my story is the fact that prices have taken a huge hit. I mean, in corn markets is what I'm talking about. What kind of led to that? Can you kind of give some background on that?
Weather, planting intentions, carry out from last year's crop, and by carry out we mean from the 2018 harvest, what was not sold to an end user like a feed mill, export, a hog farm, cattle, that's an end user. So any corn that's physically sitting in storage that can be used for this year. So we had a good crop last year.
So last year's crop.
Last year's crop.
So when you hear carry out, carry over is kind of a better,
Yeah, carry over from one year to the next. What's left over.
So we had a lot left over
We had
this
a
year.
lot left over. And then planting intentions were very high for corn. We saw in the 90 million acres for the U.S. was going to get planted. We had weather issues. That looked like it was going to back off. You saw prices rally because of that, because you were still expecting to use that corn. So when you looked at stocks to use ratio, it was shrinking, which was good for the corn market. You saw prices rally. If you're going to ration a crop, which means you want to hang on to that crop, you drive the prices up. People aren't going to buy it until they have to buy it. And that kind of helps prolong the use of that. You got more, you can hang on to it a little bit longer when prices are higher. Planting intentions didn't go the way the market thought they were going to go. As the planting season went on, we thought we were going to see less acres get planted. USDA's numbers came out. They were higher than what the trade was expecting.
Okay.
That's when you saw the market go from around the highs of 417 early this month, because we were expecting those numbers to change for the August report, drop to where we currently are now, below $4.
Now, how many of those acres do you think have to do with preventive planning with what's going on in the soybean market?
They projected around 11 million preventive acres in corn alone. So that means planting intention should have been in the 100 million acre range. So there's still a question mark there. And the other thing that they did when they adjusted those acres, they actually raised the yield. And that was another question mark. Why did you raise the yield? Bean acres were already projected to be somewhat on the lower end, and they did come in lower, and they have adjusted those. Again, we talked about carryout. That's the biggest problem on the bean side. 1 billion bushel bean carryout. That's the first time we've had 1 billion bushels, and that's killing the bean market.
How much of this is related to the trade war with China? I mean, I know that's the billion-dollar question probably, but
Or billion bushel question.
billion bushel question.
More so on the beans, I think. Unfortunately, corn is just a byproduct of that. It is impacted. They do buy some corn, and you do see some corn going to the feed markets there. Beans is the biggest factor in the trade with China. And I think an underlying factor that people kind of gloss over is the swine fever issue that they've had.
Yeah.
They've lost so many pigs that they don't need the volume of grain that they needed last year. So if they needed 1 million bushels a month, you could cut that in half because they just don't need it.
Yeah.
And to illustrate how big of a problem that is, we're talking about hundreds of millions of pigs that are dead in China. So think about how much grain in terms of bushels hundreds of millions of pigs can eat every year.
If I remember correctly, Neil, you had mentioned before that they lost the equivalent to the entire U.S. hog production.
And that's a really conservative estimate because China is not forthcoming with that information. So that's probably a very rough it's probably extremely conservative. They're estimating upwards of 80% from what I've heard of their herd.
From what FC Stone report came out and pretty much said you could take all the pigs in Canada, all the pigs in the U.S., and another country I can't remember. We still couldn't replace what they've lost.
Wow.
They can't go out in the market and buy hogs to replace what they lost. And you think of wild pigs, how fast they populate. Well, they're killing off their breeding stock. So they don't have the breeder hogs to produce more hogs. And there's no country out there willing to sell them the volume they need at one time. So they have to slowly build those stocks back up. It could take 5 years before they could really build their feeder hogs back up.
So what, are you saying that it could take 5 years for the markets, the corn and soybean markets, to really, feel that?
It could. It could happen quicker depending on what we produce, what South America produces. You get a devastating year in South America, it really changes the numbers on what exports are going to do. You get a bad year in here in the U.S., it can change. Right now, we're just sitting on too much because the demand was there to have that much. China was 80% of our bean exports. So you lose that just on the trade war, it hurts. But you lose their volume into South America as well, it's going to hurt globally. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, adjust acres at some point to meet just the less demand that we're seeing.
I want to bring up that you talk about, that how much losing that 80% market to China hurts, but how much does that hurt our rural economies? Because you have farmers who would normally be making some money, a little bit of profit, and able to fix all their equipment and buy new equipment, that sort of thing, putting your more economist hat on. How does that affect folks up in Monterey, Louisiana?
You move that grain to market, so that's fuel, that's wages for your individuals that work for you. They're spending that money in the grocery stores. So if they're not moving, if they're putting it in grain storage, or if they're not moving it, well, then people aren't getting paid because they don't have a job. And then the prices shrank. We saw last year where they weren't getting top dollar for that grain. So that's less money in the farmer pocket. So that's less money he's potentially paying out to his employees because he might have to let somebody go. He might not be able to afford that truck driver. You know, I might have to keep 3 guys out of my 5 guys that work for me. I got to let 2 go. And so that ripples effect on up to everywhere.
Yeah, and that's less trucks being bought. That's less.
That's less parts at the parts store. Yeah.
Well, I guess my question is, with China out of the market potentially for 5 years, how do the grain markets recover? Where do they go? Where does all this grain go?
You have other markets that are buying. They just don't buy the volume. So we're not going to replace that 80% from China. We have to figure out a way to grow enough acres to keep our farmers in business, to keep prices high enough to where they can make a living, and then find those other markets. You know, last year, the grain facilities loaded export ships. They were just few and far between. Instead of loading 2 bean boats back to back, they would load a bean boat, maybe a corn boat, maybe what they call a grocery boat, where you load several commodities on one ship. Then you get back to a bean boat, then maybe another bean boat. So it was very spread out, where you're used to seeing those bean boats just back to back to back. Then a corn boat would come in, and then just bean, bean, bean. It's going to thin up, you know, to where they're just not as often as you want them to be.
Back to my story, we're talking about corn and corn prices. I talked to a couple of farmers who, you know, they just said you can't, you know, cash flow $3.60 corn. What do you know? I mean, are there numbers out there of how many farmers had, or how many bushels of Louisiana corn is booked, you know, already, and how many are kind of waiting and hoping that market goes back up? Are there numbers out there for that?
I mean, we have our numbers. You know, a lot of our customers were fortunate to get some stuff booked at the 420s, 430s, even some guys booked as high as 450. So what they're doing is they're hedging. So the Board of Trade gets to a price where they like it. So they sell grain at those numbers and wait. The good side to that is they're capitalizing as the market rallies to these levels. The downside is if you get bad weather that pushes through, it could wipe out your crop. Then you've got this stuff hedged, then you got to try to get out of it. How do you get out of it? But if things go well, like it's done this year for them, they can sell a good chunk of their crop at the higher prices, and then the basis, what the elevator offers for you to go there, they can take a look at that and say, okay, well, this location gives me the best opportunity to get the most money. So they set it to go to those elevators, they sell it to those elevators, and they deliver it. And we've seen where it helps them get high prices for a good chunk of grain, and then once they fill those contracts, then they can sell where the market is, although it's a lower price, still average a strong price, or they can just sit on it and wait for this market to rally, either put it in grain storage or sell basis, which means they just take the price that the elevator's offering, like a 10 over, a 10 under, something like that.
So they offer 10 cents more per bushel.
10 cents more per bushel than what the Board of Trade is trading, or less, you know, plus or minus. So they can take that, still deliver it to the elevators, get it out of their storage, or if they don't have storage,
Get it out of their field.
Get it out of their field, and then they can watch the market. And if we get some rallies, then they can sell and you know, try to benefit from there. But I think a good chunk of the growers sold corn above $4 than below $4.
Got you. Well, that's encouraging. That's good news, especially the way, I mean, Avery and Neil kept asking me because my dad farms corn, and they're like, well, did you see what the corn market did? I'm like, no, I don't follow it like I probably should, I guess, reporting on it. But I didn't know how much how many Louisiana farmers are actually going to feel that hit as bad. I mean, I know they're all going to feel it in some way or another this year or next.
You know, they still can because, you know, the back of the mind is always that storm's going to run through. You know, we can see that hurricane, or we can have some other issue. So, I mean, they sell a small percentage of their crop. So, yeah, they might have sold some at $4.30, but they might sell the bulk of their crop at $3.80, $3.70, and by the time it average out, it's barely $4. So, yeah, a lot did get some sold at $4, and I think a good chunk did, but it's whether they sell the rest of the crop. You know, I feel confident that I think a good chunk of the Louisiana farmers sold in that $4 range, and when they're done, they're going to average out just fine.
that's encouraging.
So, Karl, when you go to Crowville and you see that giant mountain of corn, how big is that? Do you guys know how many bushels are in those big mountains when they pile them up?
I mean, they're million-ish bushel piles. I know that. I'm trying to remember numbers. We actually didn't talk numbers yesterday when I was there, but I want to say there's, 1 million, and there's another one. They can get as big as 2 million bushels, just depending on how long those pods are. And I have drone video in my package of those pods, and it's pretty wild to see.
When you watch that story and watch, look at the scale, because there's scale, you can see how tiny people are, how tiny trucks are compared to the 1 billion bushels or so. And then I want you to think about the fact that right now the carryout for corn in the United States is 250 times that. It's 2.5 billion bushels. Is that right, Greg?
It's close to that, yeah.
It's 2.5 billion bushels. So it's mountains, plural, of that of corn, and we're adding onto that crop.
And we tend to carry more corn, than soybeans, for whatever reason. Ethanol has taken a hit this year too. We're not seeing the ethanol production that we used to either. So that's cut into this corn usage.
Interesting.
And see, I was hoping that y'all were going to wrap it up like when he was talking about Louisiana farmers booking at 4:30, 4:50. So that way we on a happy note. But no, y'all went back to being wholly depressing. Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Greg.
There's no good news in sight, it doesn't seem like.
Have you ever seen them? Do you have footage of them actually putting corn in those pods?
Yeah.
Because that's pretty cool to watch, because they build a wall that's not very tall. It seems like 4 or 5 feet tall wall, and they pile a million bushels of corn up.
I've actually got drone footage because, working at the elevator, I've gotten to watch these pods get built year after year. And one year I remember we had so much corn, I think maybe 2012, 13 maybe. We had so much corn, they built a pod on the ground.
Yeah,
and,
I remember that.
So I've seen it. And finally, I had a drone, and I was out there shooting a story, and I had my drone up in the air right at the end of the spout at the top of the mountain, and it's a pretty cool video. Yeah. So to see that, I've got the video of them unloading and going all the way up. It's a huge conveyor belt, and then drops it off at the very top of that mountain, as you like to call it.
Greg, thanks for coming in. We really appreciate your time.
Appreciate it,
man.
man.
We know you got a little drive ahead of you, but we appreciate you coming in.
Bridge is clear.
Bridge is clear. It's a good day.
Greg Fox, Grain Marketing Specialist with the Louisiana Farm Bureau Marketing Association. We're going to move on to my story, which is sugarcane and planting. And one of the things that has been a problem, of course, up in North Louisiana, Karl, you were talking about that they had gotten sufficient rain. Maybe they need a little more to finish off some of the beans. In South Louisiana, of course, it's the opposite. We've got a lot more rainfall, and it's really patchy. It depends on where you are across the state. But planting right now is around 40%, where it should be around 65 to 70%, somewhere in there. Some people, like Ricky Gonsalan that I talked to, his planting percentage is 0.
He hadn't
Big
planted
old
anything?
goose egg. Not a thing. Now, you got to remember, one of the things you'll hear in my story is that and Avery's talked about this too previously, is that Hurricane Barry almost went right over his place.
I remember that.
So he had water in his fields. We're going to show some of that again. And it's just been wet since then. He talks about Barry, but he talks about all the rain before then, all the rain after then. And it just won't stop in his area. I also talked to Paul Scheck-Snyder, who's in Point Capee. He's planting. He's getting some in the grain. So he's related to that. He's been able to get some of that in, and I think that's what the tale is across Louisiana right now. Some have gotten it in, and some have not.
Well, I know I was watching weather last night, and New Iberia got nailed again. I mean, just thunderstorms keep coming in. It's growing up there, you could set your clock by it 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Right.
You were going to get it every day, that sea breeze.
I was there at 3 and took a picture of it, and there was a rain cloud coming up over his field. And he had just been into town. I had driven from Point Capee there into New Iberia, and in that time period, it had rained. In between the time I called him and said, hey, I'm coming, to when I got there, it had rained, and another shower was coming in. And how can you get in the fields when it's like that? And fortunately, it's good for the sugarcane. The sugarcane's looking really good out there, really, really good.
The
so
crop
it's not
is already
all
in
bad.
the field.
That's correct. And it's last year the the story with sugarcane, as you might remember, was the tonnage was high. All of the amount of sugarcane out there was up, and the sugar content was not quite as good. This year, they're hoping for a reverse of that, where it's more sugar. And I think the key is whether or not we'll see that same. Remember, in end of September last year, you had 2 solid weeks of rain. And I think that's what caused, I mean, the green grew, but the sugar content did not. Maybe, hopefully, we won't see quite that amount. It's not really wet enough right now to do that sort of thing, but it's just wet enough to keep farmers from putting the crop in the ground.
We're talking weather, talking rain, talking planting. We've talked harvesting. What's going on with Landon? Are they getting close to harvesting on soybeans?
Well, yesterday, for the first time, they actually got in the fields and made a good run. They've got about 800 acres that they got planted at the end of March, beginning of April. That was the first seed that they got in the ground. And so those 800 acres have been ready for about a week and a half.
Oh, really?
Wow.
So they have, and it has been wet. So they really need some dry weather to be able to get in there. Now, he said that they also started spraying the next round of soybeans. So it's going to be a long harvest season for them.
I talked to Jim Harper over in Cheneyville a little earlier.
That's
and
the central part of the state.
Yep. He said that they're out there planting sugarcane and harvesting soybeans all at the same time. He actually said they're a little dry. He wouldn't mind having a rain right now to help finish out the cane.
Well,
but I mean, y'all could just ship some there from the east, right?
Yeah, and it's crazy because as the crow flies, as they say, Natchez is not that far from Monterey, but until this weekend, we were bone dry. Had not had rain. It's probably since Barry came through.
Well, I feel like it's rained here for the last 2 weeks every day.
Every day, no, every day that I come here, it rains in the afternoon, and I guess that's just.
Could you just stay home?
Rude.
Could you just stay home? No, I'm kidding.
One of the things that was interesting that Paul Scheck-Snyder told me was he was also cutting beans, and he had managed to cut all of the beans. You'll see it in my piece. He is converting a lot of those bean acres to sugarcane. And I said, I asked him if that was price related, and he said, yes, of course. And I said, what would it take to bring that back? And he said, Neil, if soybeans went to $12, I wouldn't pull an acre out of sugarcane and put it back into beans.
That's what some folks are doing over in Avoyles Parish, where I was after Hurricane Barry. They said, this is the last year I'm doing soybeans on this field because I'm putting it all in sugarcane.
It'd be nice to have that option.
Yeah, is that a market thing?
It is definitely a market thing. Sugarcane is at 25 cents a pound.
Is it stable?
And, yes, it's stable, and it's seeing some good yields. It's seeing some good return on investment there, and there are some new varieties that are getting ready to hit the market in the next 5 years. 966, I think, is one of them that is offering almost like twice the sugar content. I mean, it's insane what they're hoping it will do, and hopefully, but regardless, it's just it's a crop that seems to be, as you said, relatively stable.
I'm assuming that the people that you're talking about that are switching those soybean acres to sugar acres, they're already in the sugar business.
They already are in the sugar acres.
Totally different ball game.
Right, but Paul told me. Folks in his area, I mean, Point Capee, it's ice cream land. You can grow anything there. It's that alluvial delta soil that's just so rich. I mean, and you can see there was a tractor plowing when I was there, and I mean, it's just gorgeous. The earth is just gorgeous there, just a few miles from False River. But they don't want to grow anything but sugarcane now in that area.
That may be an option further north. I don't know how far north. I don't know if it'd be quite an option for y'all, but I saw they're starting to plant trials
in Concordia Parish. I saw
Concordia Parish. Well, they're doing it at Dean Lee in Alexandria. LSU Ag Center is doing test trials.
I thought that
further north. So
Jim Harper's in Cheneyville that was. Is that not the northernmost point?
No, not anymore.
Not anymore?
No, last year, Concordia was the northernmost point. They had some sugar cane.
So maybe there's a chance.
Yeah.
Maybe so. I don't think they're going to want to
switch that. It'd be quite the change. But
the thing to look at would be to look at the sugarcane research station in St. Gabriel and see what they're coming out with, because they are looking at more cold resistant varieties and all kinds of things, because it is just such a stable crop. It's a bright spot in the field. But of course, the more people that grow sugarcane, the more of it that we have, and the price
market.
Right. it goes down. We have had gluts in sugar before, in previous years, just like we heard about from corn and soybeans.
I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that this is not going to be a go for at least Landon White because sugarcane runs directly into hunting season.
Oh,
no.
Yeah, can't
Which
be
maybe,
harvesting
you
them.
know what? That might be
You
a
might
good idea.
But the cure for high prices?
There's low prices.
No, it's high prices.
Oh, yeah, well, that's true, yeah. Okay.
Explain that.
Because when prices are high, everybody starts to plant, and that brings the price down.
Okay. There's some more.
That was an old Mike
Economics
Dana
here.
saying.
Yeah.
Cure for high prices is high prices.
Right. They also say, the easiest way to make a small fortune in farming is start with a large one. So I think it's something of that as well. Let's move on to Field to Feast. Karl, tell us about Jennifer's couldn't be with us today, but once again, it looks September is rice month. We're coming up on that, and they have some rice and some beef coming up this week.
I tell you what, they went out to Gonsalin. Am I saying that right? Gonsalin?
Yeah, Gonsalin Land and Cattle.
I'm a redneck from North Louisiana, so forgive me. But Gonsalin Land and Cattle, and they do a lot of grass-fed, custom beef there, and they have a storefront. It's pretty cool, and in the back of that storefront, they have a big grilling patio.
That's his house, by the way.
That's his house?
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah.
So wait, the storefront is in his house?
No, he's got the storefront, and behind the storefront a little further back.
Oh,
is
well,
his house.
I
He's
didn't
got
make
a
that
pool
connection.
right there and
I didn't
everything.
make all
A
that connection.
tiny little grill for those tiny little pellets of rice.
Yeah, well,
You said he was grilling
did
rice.
not grill rice. Did not grill rice. I said that,
That's
but
what you wrote.
it's in the outdoor. It's in the outdoor kitchen. They have a little stove top right there next to the grill.
Barbie grill.
Little
But
screen door.
Yeah.
my goodness, it looked awesome. Chef Celeste is there with Jennifer out in the field, and they grill up some, I don't even know, fillets or T-bones or something. They looked incredible. I don't think they're T-bones. They're ribeyes or fillets. I can't remember, but they looked incredible. But what really caught my attention was the rice. The way she cooked that rice, she had all kinds of stuff in there, and I was like, wait, I thought you just put water and maybe a little salt.
Well, how did she cook the rice?
I don't even. She put all kinds of like onions and garlic and just all kinds of different seasonings and bell pepper, green onions, all this type of stuff in the rice with it, and it was pretty impressive. I mean, I'm gonna watch it and follow step by step with Chef Celeste because it looks like a cool way to cook rice.
You know what's so great about this series is this natural connection between these chefs and these farmers that are there. They just get along so well. And I mean, of course, they're connected by the food. That's obvious, but they just never run out of stuff to talk about. It's farmers do like to cook, generally speaking, and you're not the only one with a Traeger out there. I'm sure they love to. I know you have one too, and they just love to cook. And you can see these farmers a lot of times they're watching closely what these chefs are doing.
There, you can see in one of the shots they have a GoPro shot with Chef Celeste, and there's a couple of Chef Celeste and Jennifer are sitting there kind of prepping, and you can see just off to the edge of it. Shannon is sitting there like you can see him taking pictures and watching close exactly what you're saying.
I was going to say that's a perfect team up with Chef Celeste and Shannon Gosselin because the last time I went to Shannon Gosselin's place, he was the one grilling up the steaks, and he wasn't really grilling. He did it on cast iron.
I was about to say.
And he did it at low heat, really low. And those were, oh my God, they were so good. But Chef Celeste is just such a wonderful person. She's knowledgeable and really sweet on and off camera. I can't say enough good things about Chef Celeste. So to get those two together, Jennifer Finley really did a great job in finding these two kind of kindred spirits and putting them together.
Speaking of beef and cows, we have a little extra beef on the show this week.
Yeah, a whole shank extra.
You sent me in. To answer your email, delayed. No, I do not know who that farmer is.
That's okay. We found out who he is.
I found out who
Yes.
he was. I called Raquel Landry, who's our field rep down in that area of the state, and I said, "Hey, can you help me find this guy?" And she, a couple texts later, she's like,
easy,
"Hey, here's your email. Here's his phone number."
In case you're wondering, there was a calf born in Calcasieu Parish with a
Not
fifth
4.
leg,
Yeah.
5 legs,
Five
a calf,
legs.
a leg growing off the side of its head,
It actually looks like like it's some kind of dreadlock that it's wrapped around
right,
Dreadlock.
yeah.
into a butt. That's what it looks like. That's the first thing
It's
I
a
thought.
Rastafarian
Yes.
cow.
Yeah.
Hey, man, how many leg you got?
And in one of the articles, he said that it has a knee joint just like a normal leg, and that it operates just
Wow.
like the other 4 legs, and it has a
Right.
hoof on it. So I'm not sure what,
Yeah.
But I got the backstory in researching this before we did the TWILA Boost today. They believe, they're not certain, but the mother possibly had twins, and that when the embryos split, it did not split completely. And so, and then I'm guessing that she either lost the other calf, or the other calf was sold at a different time, because the mother was there, but the cat at the sale barn when he bought the calf, but the calf was not with the mother. He went back and found where the mother was and bought both of them together.
Oh, that's neat. That's
So
a neat
that's their-
story.
yeah.
Well,
I'm
Carl's going to
going-
go cover them.
I'm going this weekend to meet Matt and Elsie and get to know kind of. I told him, I was like, hey, I know you've gotten a lot of media coverage. I want to come do a story about you and about Elsie, but I want to talk about the rest of what you do. And it's really cool. He started telling me he's also. I'm going to have probably more of this to share next episode, but he also does his own leather work.
Cool.
And he's got, his own little, farm that he's operating there. So it's not just, he didn't just happen upon this 5-legged calf and say, oh, I'm going to get that. He's already got some ag going on at his house and his farm there. So I'm going to do more of a story about that, but you can't ignore the 5-legged
There's your
calf.
hook, yeah.
No. There's your hoof.
So yeah, I'm excited about going out there this weekend.
I'll break a leg. I couldn't resist. On the other side of the state, we had a different record setter there. A gigantic grapefruit, the world record size grapefruit. 28 and a half and
23
3/4.
quarters. Yes.
that
My
3/4.
waist size when I graduated high school.
Yep. Not very different, I'm sure, from today. But it was also the largest in circumference and heaviest. Is that
Yep.
right?
7 pounds, 14.63 ounces.
Did I see they had a net that was holding it as it grew? Is that what that was
Yep.
for?
Yep.
Yeah,
Oh,
to make sure
was
it
it
wouldn't
holding it,
fall.
or was it just to catch it?
No, it was holding it.
Oh, really?
Keep
Yeah,
it on,
to keep
because
it on the-
that's much weight, it would
That's
fall
crazy.
off of the tree. But this wasn't someone in Plaquemines Parish who already had an orchard and grow citrus. This was a guy in his backyard.
Well, he had some unfair help, though.
Unfair?
He had fairies.
Fairies.
It was in a fairy. His daughter made a fairy ring and grew it. They grew it up through there. So, make of that what you will.
Citrus witchcraft.
There you go. All right. Well, I think that about does it for this TWILA After Show. Guys, thanks for coming in. Kristen Oakes, Avery Davidson, Karl Wiggers, and, of course, thanks to Greg Fox for coming in as well. We'll see you on the next episode.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and even share it with a friend or two. Also, if you liked it, go ahead and leave us a review. Tell us what you think about the show. What would you like to hear more of? What do you not like that much? That's okay to hear too. The TWILA After Show podcast is brought to you by the Louisiana Farm Bureau Federation. Louisiana Farm Bureau is the voice of Louisiana agriculture. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you again right here next week.